Good evening. Welcome to the public meeting of the Standing Committee on Social Development. Before we start with the meeting, I'm asked Mr. O'Reilly to open up with a prayer.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. If you wish to experience peace, provide peace for another. If you wish to know you are safe, cause another to know that they are safe. If you wish to understand seemingly incomprehensible things, help another to understand. If you wish to heal your own sadness or anger, seek to heal the sadness or anger of another. Dalai Lama.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. We have one agenda item, which is Bill 48. Can I have a clause by clause hearing? Can I have a mover? Moved by Mr. Blake. All in favor? Thank you. Declaration of conflict of interest. Seeing none. Today, sorry. Actually, I should start. I'll start with on the left here. I should actually introduce my colleagues.
Good evening, Frederick Blake, MLA for Mackenzie Delta. Welcome.
Good evening. Welcome. Michael Natter, MLA for Dutchell.
Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Good evening, Shane Thompson, Nahende. On my left, far left, is Sheila McPherson, our law clerk. Closest to my left is Allison Anderson, our committee advisor. And on my right is Jennifer Frankie Smith, committee clerk. Today, the Standing Committee on Social Development is holding a public clause-by-clause review of Bill 48, Post-Secondary Education Act. Bill 48, sponsored by the Department of Education, Culture and Employment, proposed to Bill 48 is proposed to serve as a single act, providing an overarching legislative framework governing territorial post-secondary institutions. Bill 48 received second reading in the Legislative Assembly on March 14, 2019, and was referred to the Standing Committee on Government Operations for review. To commence its review of Bill 48, the committee sent out letters inviting input from an extensive list of stakeholders, including all municipal indigenous governments in the Northwest Territories and a number of non-governmental organizations. During the week of May 13, 2019, the committee traveled to and held public meetings on Bill 48 in Fort Smith, Hay River, Fort Providence, Betchiko, Inuvik, and Tuktoyaktuk. A final public hearing was held in Yellowknife on May 23, 2019. Committee thanks everyone who attended these meetings or provided written submissions to the committee sharing their views on Bill 48. As a result of the committee's consultation, committee will be proposing 18 amendments to Bill 48. The details of the submissions received by committee and the nature of committee's deliberations will be addressed in a report to be presented in the Legislative Assembly next week. There are copies of the bill available at the back of the room. Committee would also like to thank the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment and her staff for a collaborative approach on the review of Bill 48. I will now invite the Honourable Minister of Education, Culture and Employment to introduce yourself and your staff for the record and proceed with any opening comments you may have. Minister Cochrane.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair and committee members. I'm pleased to be here to discuss Bill 48, Post-Secondary Education Act. With me tonight, I have Ms. Sylvia Hayner, back, my Deputy Minister, Mr. Andy Bevan, Assistant Deputy Minister, Labour and Income Security, Dr. Chris Joseph is the ECE Technical Lead on the Post-Secondary Education Act, Ms. Sherry Girock, who's the Legislative Counsel for the Department of Justice, Mr. Sam Shannon, Director of Policy, Legislation and Communications, Ms. Julia Mott, Senior Advisor to the Deputy Minister, and Ms. Mira Dunn, Ministerial Special Advisor. Mr. Chair, the primary objective of the Act is to create a process of recognition within the Northwest Territories that ensures the effective governance and quality assurance of all post-secondary institutions and their programs. The new system of quality assurance will provide consumer protection for students and employers that depend on institutions to provide the appropriate level and types of education and training. Currently, in the Northwest Territories, we do not have a clear and incremental pathway for an organization to gain recognition as a post-secondary institution. The Post-Secondary Education Act will promote the growth of our post-secondary system and enable organizations to gain different levels and types of recognition based on their own mission and goals. Such recognition is essential to maintaining the confidence of students, employers, and post-secondary education funders from the public and private sector. For the first time under one piece of legislation, organizations will be able to gain formal recognition as a private training institution, college, or university. Organizations may also apply for recognition of their degree program or private vocational training program. In addition to quality assurance processes, the Post-Secondary Education Act creates the ability to recognize Indigenous post-secondary institutions operating in the Northwest Territories. However, the Act is only the first step. The specific process and evaluation criteria will be developed through further engagements with Indigenous governments that will shape this important part of our post-secondary education system. The Post-Secondary Education Act has grown out of a long process of engagement with stakeholders across the territory. The discussion paper released by the department in January 2018 outlined what we must achieve through this legislation and has served as a basis for ongoing dialogue with stakeholders. Officials from the department have been meeting regularly with stakeholders to hear their concerns and ideas, as well as provide them with updates on the development of the legislation. The department will continue to engage stakeholders to ensure subsequent regulations are clear, effective, and supportive of organizations striving to grow their role in meeting the educational needs of Northerners. Under the new legislation, the post-secondary education system will increasingly become a collaboration between a growing number of post-secondary education organizations operating in the Northwest Territories. It provides a framework for how we will work together moving forward. Mr. Chair, I'd like to recognize the hard work of the members of this committee during your review. The questions you posed throughout the process were thoughtful and demonstrate an in-depth analysis of the bill. I'm also very proud of the collaboration between officials from your committee, ECE, and the Department of Justice in the development and refinement of this bill. I was pleased to receive committee's motions to amend Bill 48, and I'd like to thank you for your proposed changes that help to ensure that we present the best bill possible to the House. I concur with and support all 18 motions and will be pleased to include them as amendments to the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Does committee have any general comments or questions before we begin the clause-by-clause review? Seeing none, does committee agree to conduct a clause-by-clause review of Bill 48, Post-Secondary Education Act? Thank you, committee. We will defer the title of the bill until the end and begin the consideration of the clause. There are 49 clauses in the bill. We will group, or say 69 clauses in the bill. We will group the clauses where possible. Please turn to page 6 of the bill. Clause number 1. Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill 48 be amended in that portion of the definition public college preceding paragraph A in subclause 1 by striking out means an institution and substituting means an institution, school, or place.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. The motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We concur with this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Committee, to clause 1 as amended. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 2. Clause 2? Agreed. Thank you. Clause 3, Mr. Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Motion that Clause 3 of Bill 48 by amended by, is that correct? That Clause 3 of Bill 48 be
sorry.
amended by A, bracket A, striking out N at the end of the English version of paragraph bracket D, bracket B, striking out the period at the end of paragraph bracket E and substituting and bracket C, adding the following after paragraph bracket E. F, respects the unique values, history, and cultures of the people of the Northwest Territories.
Thank you, Mr. Natalie. The motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is actually a great amendment. I really thank the committee for bringing this forward. It really talks about our diversity in our Northwest Territories. So yes, I totally concur with this motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Committee to Clause 3 as amended. Does committee agree?
Agreed.
Thank you, committee. Clause 4.
Agreed.
Clause 5.
Agreed.
Clause 6.
Agreed.
Clause 7. Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that paragraph 7, brackets 1, brackets A of Bill 48 be amended by striking out review matters referred to it and substituting review matters relating to quality assurance referred to it.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. The motion is in order. To the motion? The question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The minister concurs with this motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. To committee, Clause 7 as amended. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 7, Mr. Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that paragraph 7, bracket 2, bracket C of Bill 48 be deleted and the following substituted. Bracket C, at least one other member.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Natalie. The motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment actually makes the bill more flexible, and so yes, the minister concurs with this motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Committee to Clause 7 as amended. Does committee agree?
Agreed.
Thank you. Clause 7, Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that subclause 7, brackets 4 of Bill 48 be amended by striking out powers and duties of the committee and substituting powers and duties of that committee.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. The motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I concur with this motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Committee to Clause 7 as amended. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 8. Clause 8 agreed? Okay. Clause number 9, Mr. Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Clause 9 of Bill 48 be amended by striking out recognized an institution and substituting recognize that institution.
Thank you, Mr. Natalie. To the motion. Thank you. Question has been called. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This adds clarity. Yes, I agree with, concur with the motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Committee to Clause 9 as amended. Does committee agree? Thank you. Clause 10 to 15? Thank you, committee. Clause 16 to 20? Thank you. Clauses 21 to 25? Clause 26? Clause 27, Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Clause 27 of Bill 48 be amended by deleting the definition program of instruction and substituting the following. Program of instruction means a course or series of courses of instruction which, when successfully completed, results in the student receiving a certificate, diploma, or degree from a private training institution or from another institution in partnership with the private training institution.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I concur with this motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Committee to Clause 27 as amended. Does committee agree? Thank you. Clause 27, Mr. Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill 48 be amended in the definition student contract in Clause 27 by striking out an agreement and substituting an agreement in writing.
Thank you, Mr. Natalie. To the motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Any agreement should be in writing, so I definitely concur with this motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Committee to Clause 27 as amended. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 28 to 30? Thank you. Clause 31, Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill 48 be amended in the English version of paragraph 31, brackets 1, bracket C, by striking out and new terms or conditions and substituting and new terms or condition.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. The motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I concur with this amendment.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Committee to Clause 31 as amended. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 31, Mr. Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that subclause 31 bracket 5 of Bill 48 be amended by striking out a private training institution shall provide to the minister and substituting a private training institution shall, for the purpose of facilitating notice under paragraphs bracket 6, bracket B, provide to the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Natalie. The motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Any motion that adds clarity to an act so people can interpret the intent better is a good motion. So yes, I concur with this motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Committee to Clause 31 as amended. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 32. Thank you. Clause 33, Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that subclause 33 brackets 2 of Bill 48 be amended by striking out the institution shall provide to the minister and substituting the institution shall, for the purpose of facilitating notice under paragraph 4, brackets B, provide to the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. The motion is ordered. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with this motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Committee to Clause 33 as amended. Does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 34 to 38? Thank you. Clause 39, Mr. Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill 48 be amended in the English version of paragraph 39, bracket 1, bracket C, by striking out and new terms or conditions and substituting add new terms or conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Natalie. The motion is in order. To the motion? Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Another reason why many ayes is good to do when you put through acts. Yes, this was a drafting error, and so yes, we concur with the motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Committee, to Clause 39 as amended, does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 39, Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that subclause 39 brackets 5 of Bill 48 be amended by striking out the holder of the certificate of registration shall provide to the director and substituting the holder of the certificate of the registration shall, for the purpose of facilitating notice under paragraphs bracket 6 brackets B, provide to the director.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I concur with the motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Committee, to Clause 39 as amended, does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 40. Thank you. Clause 41, Mr. Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that subclass 41 bracket 2 of Bill 48 be amended by striking out the person shall provide to the director and substituting the person shall, for the purpose of facilitating notice under paragraph bracket 4 bracket B, provide to the director.
Thank you, Mr. Natalie. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with this motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Committee, to Clause 41 as amended, does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 42 to 50? Clause 51 to 54? Thank you. Clause 55, Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that subclause 55 brackets 2 of Bill 48 be amended by striking out shall, notwithstanding the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act, provide the information to the minister and substituting shall provide the information to the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment helps to strengthen the bill. We did go back and check with the Information and Privacy Commissioner for clarity, and so thank you again. This was great work on behalf of the committee. So yes, I concur with this motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. To committee, Clause 55 as amended, does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 56, Mr. Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill 48 be amended and that portion of subclass 56 bracket 1 preceding paragraph bracket A by striking out, notwithstanding the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act, the minister may, and substituting the minister may.
Thank you, Mr. Natalie. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with this motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Committee, to Clause 56 as amended, does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 57 to 60. Thank you, committee. Clause 61 to 65. Thank you. Clause 66, Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill 48 be amended in that portion of paragraph 66 bracket C preceding subparagraph brackets I by striking out an advisory committee and substituting a post-secondary education advisory committee.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I concur with this motion.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Committee, to Clause 66 as amended, does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 66, Mr. Natalie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Clause 66 of Bill 48 be amended by adding the following after paragraph bracket N. Bracket N, point 1, respecting requirements for student contracts and prescribing criteria to be included in student contracts.
Thank you, Mr. Natalie. The motion in order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Does the minister concur with this amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with the amendment.
Thank you, Minister Cochran. Committee, to Clause 66 as amended, does committee agree? Thank you, committee. Clause 67? Clause 68? Clause 69? We will now return to the bill number entitled Bill 48, Post-Secondary Education. Does committee agree? Sorry. Does the committee agree that Bill 48, Post-Secondary Act, is now ready for consideration in the whole of a committee of the whole? Mr. Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Bill 48, Post-Secondary Education Act, be reported to the Assembly as ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole as amended by and reprinted.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. The motion is in order. The motion is on the floor to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Bill 48, Post-Secondary Education Act, will be reported to the Assembly as ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole as amended and reprinted. At this point in time, I'd like to thank the minister and her staff and our staff here for working together to make this a better bill for the residents of the Northwest Territories. I appreciate all the hard work you did to get this bill done. And again, thank you very much for everybody coming to this meeting and for people making their submissions. At this point in time, we will adjourn the meeting.